Why is it that the busiest women do everything right, but still can't lose body fat, and especially belly fat? Like you have a successful career, you're working out a lot, you're quite disciplined, you have an active social life on top, doing your daily steps, you're tracking your food, maybe even in a caloric deficit, but still can't lose body fat. There is an interesting and related story that comes to mind about a woman who's a client of mine. She's working as a researcher, so she's leading a team of researchers at the clinic. So it's 10-hour working days, mostly, sometimes even 12-hour days. So that's quite a lot. If you look at it, it's a 60-hour work week. And if you're doing full time, that's another 50% on top. So quite a high work volume. At the same time, she was doing CrossFit. So it's an intense way of working out, was exhausting. She did that multiple times a week. Plus, she was researching in the medical field, which means she had the knowledge. She knew what to do also with her food. She increased her protein intake, had more vegetables, therefore watching the calories, almost no snacking, desserts, etc. So she just was watching everything. Right? On paper, she did everything right, but somehow also had an active social life, for example, but somehow still couldn't make any more progress, especially the belly fat and the fat around the waist and hip area was stuck somehow. The previous years, she actually made a lot of progress with the approach I just mentioned, but then at some point, especially the belly fat around the waist and hip area was stuck. And she was just wondering, hey, what's going on? She also had like a liver condition, so she had to take medication for that. But otherwise, she was fine, she was healthy, doing everything right, but couldn't make any progress. And when we started working with each other, I came in and had the option to look at this a bit more from like this bird's eye perspective, so to say, to get a better overview. And what I tend to see with women that are quite ambitious and working a lot and having maybe leading positions, a lot of responsibility, is that they are constantly in this state of what we call the sympathetic nervous system, meaning the part of your nervous system that leads to you being more aware, more active, right? More conscious about things and just there, just alert, right? And your body needs to be, if you have a lot of responsibility and just the pure volume of work that you're doing, not only when you're in an actual stress situation where your body is doing physical work like the CrossFit, for example, but also when you're just awake and alert, your body has to be active. So that's where the sympathetic nervous system comes into play. It's active when you need to be alert. And that's also when our bodies produce cortisol, right? That stress hormone that makes us wake up in the morning and so on and so on and so forth. So when I came in, that was quite an obvious thing that I saw. It was like all her life was like happening in this sympathetic nervous system. Like if you imagine that if you're doing 12-hour shifts, so 12-hour days, 10-hour days, you're so alert and attentive the whole day when you have a lot of responsibility as well at work. Then on top of that, the workouts, on top of that, watching your food, because you also need to be more aware when you're going out. For example, she had an active social life as well. You're constantly alert and aware, right? You can't just let things happen if you're constantly alert. And that's what, of course, puts your body in this more sympathetic state. And we'll dive into that, into how this affects the fat loss in a second. Now you're asking yourself, what's the issue with the sympathetic nervous system and the increased cortisol levels from this active lifestyle? Like everyone tells you to get your shit together, be disciplined, be motivated. So you should be working out, you should be strict with the food, you should be disciplined, right? But the thing really is, and what I mentioned with this overall stress load, also with the lifestyle of the client that I mentioned before, is that it adds up. Even if these things are not negative, and that's what's so misunderstood about the cortisol topic. We think cortisol comes when we're stressed, when we're like negative about something. But cortisol, the function of this hormone is really to keep your body alert. So whenever you need to be alert because you have responsibility at work, because you're working out, your body needs to be alert physically, or right, you're just thinking, you're planning, you're bringing your scale somewhere, you're meal prepping, all of that thinking itself already. This being alertness is what increases cortisol. It's not just stress in the sense of something negative. Stress, if we look at the definition of stress, is just you, it's life, right? It's life. Like whenever you're doing something and you have responsibility, and that's part of life, that's when we have increased cortisol levels, and it's something healthy, it's something good, right? It's what makes us wake up in the morning, right? This cortisol rhythm makes us wake up in the morning, so it's something good. So what I'm really talking about when I mention this overall stress load, with the previous example of the client, it might be a very similar situation for you, is it adds up, right? So your cortisol is higher when you're with friends, when you're going out, when you're active, when you're moving around, when you're planning something, when you're at work, when you have a 10-hour, 12-hour work, and cortisol is increased when you're working out. So these things just add up, and that's what can then potentially lead to chronically increased cortisol levels. So the cortisol itself isn't bad, it's just a tool that your body uses. But if, right, the balance, the yin and yang is not right, then that's what leads to issue. And that's why we know, for example, you've probably heard of that chronically increased cortisol then increases cravings for comfort food, right? We're in the survival mode. Your body thinks you're in the survival mode, it doesn't want you to die. So what it does is you're craving more so that you can store body fat for like the bad times to avoid starvation, etc. That's also why belly fat is harder to lose with increased cortisol levels. That's also why you're having a harder time falling asleep at night, because your body wants you to be alert. Again, it's like the survival mode. Also, you're waking up more throughout the night. You have increased anxiety. So if you've ever, for example, worked out a lot during 1 week, maybe have like the short-term feeling of overtraining, or you've just worked a lot, and top of that you've done a training session, and then you just felt like it was too much, or you're generally just stressed because you moved places or you moved cities or something like that. And we all know this feeling when we're constantly anxious, like suddenly like everything, we're worrying about everything, like we lie awake at night and worry about the most unnecessary things. And that's what is this feeling like of increased anxiety, which also comes or can come as a result of this chronically increased cortisol level. So that's really the problem that we're talking about. And when it comes to fat loss, it has a couple other implications next to what I just mentioned. It also increases insulin resistance, right? If the cortisol just stays high, it increases insulin resistance, and due to the behaviors of more anxiety, more cravings, etc., it makes it just harder to lose belly fat. So again, cortisol isn't something bad, but if you're constantly active because you're just a high performer, you're a high achiever, right? You have high standards, you want to like perform, you want to grow, you want to progress. That's when you can be too much in the activation side of the nervous system, too much in the sympathetic nervous system, and spend too little time with the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's really the balance that I'm talking about all the time. Now, the question remains, why is she still not progressing even though she's doing everything right? Yes, of course, her cortisol levels are increased, but if she's doing everything right, she should at least progress a bit. She should at least lose some belly fat, some waist fat, and so on. And the answer for that is, she's not doing everything right. Because if you have that kind of increased cortisol levels, you need to support your body so it can sustain that situation over time. You need, for example, to support your adrenals, which is the organ that produces the stress hormones, amongst others. You need to support your adrenals with micronutrients, etc., in a way where it can sustain that kind of sympathetic nervous system situation and that kind of state of arousal over time. So does she give her body the right and enough micronutrients? Is her, for example, her protein intake actually suiting the demand that she has based on her goals, based on where she's at, and so on? And is she maybe still, and that was the situation with the client I mentioned, replacing some meals with a coffee or just a little snack, right? And all of these things, for example, stimulants like coffee and caffeine, don't support your body really, right? So yes, of course you feel increased energy, but it drains your adrenals, for example, even more. So it's not something, it's like an energy drink, right? You get this quick energy credit, right, from the bank, but then you have to pay it back later, and it's really not something that supports you over time. So these kind of habits may look fine on the outside, and then, oh, she didn't eat anything for like a meal and therefore just had a coffee, should be fine to lose body fat, especially she saved some calories, but it's just stressing her system that is already in that sympathetic state even more by forcing her to stay in the sympathetic state, even though her body doesn't even have the resources to stay there. Another example would be workouts, right? Doing the HIIT workouts, doing the CrossFit sessions. They always do the workout of the day, workout of the week, right? Which is very exhausting and very demanding. But a lot of times, 60 minutes, that kind of intensity or let's say that kind of exhaustion with like very little breaks is like the best recipe to increase your cortisol levels even further. And that after like a day where she worked till 6 p.m. and then at 7 or 8 she does the CrossFit session, we know that even with a normal training that doesn't increase cortisol levels in an unhealthy way, your cortisol will still be increased for 4 hours after the end of the session, statistically. So if you're already stressed, right? If you had like a long day, a lot of responsibilities again, and the session was long, like 60 plus minutes, it might be increasing cortisols even more, right? Because the 4 hours is just an average, an estimate. So that affects her sleep, and then it's the best example when she came in working with me. She went to bed after 12, right? So after midnight, meaning that costs her a lot of recovery as well, especially again for the adrenals. And the next day they're even more fatigued. So if we look at what means right, then we need to like consider the fact that she's already in that state where she demands a lot from her body, and then these things that look right on the outside are usually not the right things for her specifically. And then talking about eating more protein, eating more veggies, and therefore decreasing calories. Also decreasing calories. If you have that kind of activity level and you want to grow some muscle and tone up as well, plus you're doing quite intense workouts, always just eating less isn't the solution neither, right? Of course, there's not a one size fits all answer here. That really strongly depends on what you're having at the moment. But right, so the thing that looked right on the outside wasn't really right on the inside. And after taking a deeper dive and looking into what she was actually doing. Now let's get to the fun part, the solution system. And I'll tell you one thing before we dive into it. 90% of coaches out there will tell you to reduce your stress. Reduce your stress, right? Improve your stress levels by having less stress and so on. And you're like, oh yeah, I'll do that. I'll reduce my stress and I will focus on my recovery. But what does that mean like specifically? Because what does that mean specifically? Because if we look at the function of cortisol again, it rises when you need to be alert, and there's a reason for your body needing to be alert. So if you have responsibility at work, then your body needs to increase cortisol. There's a reason for that. It's not that you can just decrease it by decreasing stress. Yes, of course, you can manage stress better by, for example, doing some breath work if you're like in a super stressed situation or something like that. But overall, the overall problem is the overall volume of activity of situations where your body needs to be alert, and that won't go away. If you have 2 kids at home, you have responsibility for 2 human beings. You should fucking be alert. Hey, you shouldn't chill, right? You should be alert. There's like a reason. There's a reason you have the responsibility. So same thing at work. Same thing for your training. You should be alert when you're working out. You don't decrease cortisol levels when you're working out. You should be alert. There's a reason for your body that it needs to be alert. So the whole thing is we need to support our body to manage that better. That's what we need to do. And that's what we'll dive in a second. And when you like, people mean that in a nice way, right? They mean well when they say reduce your stress, take care of yourself, and so on. But right, just make sure it's not delusional, because there's a reason you need to be alert, and you need to be stressed, and stress is not something negative. Stress is life. So make sure to just support your body in a way where it like can function better, where, for example, the adrenals that produce those stress hormones can work in a better way, and you support it and you don't try to reduce the stress. So that's what we're talking about. And there's 3 levers I want to walk you through today. Of course, a lot of that is individual and specific. That's why what we're doing is things that I'm doing with all of my clients that are generally working, that are important for everyone, and that right now are not like super individual to like a specific case. And we'll start with treating your mornings like they're sacred. Treating your mornings in a way where you can stabilize the mornings, because that's really having one of the most significant effects of the whole day. So if your cortisol is healthy, high-ish throughout the day and stable, your blood sugar is stable throughout the day in the morning, that's going to have a huge effect on your whole day. So your morning really has like a big impact. And number 1 is your breakfast, all right? Start your day with protein a bit of fat, and veggies. And usually that means no carbohydrates. For the vast, vast majority of clients that I've worked with, without carbohydrates works way better. And you can test that yourself, right? It's all about keeping blood sugar stable and staying energetic, meaning you can start your morning, and on Instagram I have like plenty videos and reels where I walk you through breakfast options. I also have a free meal guide, so if you connect on Instagram name is Philip Weber C, C for coaching. Then there's like plenty tips, so we're not diving into that right now, but protein and fat breakfast in the morning is super crucial, number one. And for some people, you can experiment with that. If you made very good experience, for example, with classic would be oatmeal in the morning, you can try and test that. But one thing you should do is you should be aware of your energy in the hours after the breakfast. So watch your energy levels, watch your level of focus, concentration in especially 1 hour, 60 minutes post breakfast, and also generally the hours until lunch and until the afternoon, because that's when it has the strongest effect. So usually that's a protein and fat breakfast. Some people also do quite well with oatmeal, with cornmeal, maybe with some gluten-free bread, even some carpaccio on top, some protein sauce on top, some cottage cheese on top, something along these lines. But usually it's protein and fat, because that stabilizes blood sugar and really helps you stay focused, stay alert, stay attentive throughout the day. Not just coffee, not just an apple. That's all no proper breakfast. We really need some fat to stabilize blood sugar. Ideally, the rest should be protein. That also helps stabilize it a lot. Some people do well with carbohydrates, but that's the exception. So especially if you want to lose body fat, chances are you're not doing so well with carbohydrates in the morning, and protein and fat breakfast will be the best option for you. Something else to stabilize the morning, especially when it comes to supporting your adrenals, rehydration, and so on. First thing after you did your mouth routine, like brushing your teeth and so on, should be a salt lime water. It's a big glass of water, should be warm-ish ideally to not stress your stomach. Quarter teaspoon of salt, ideally colored salt. That can be sea salt, blue mineral salt, also pink Himalayan salt, for example, and half a lime. So the juice of half a lime, or just a shot of lime juice from a glass bottle. That's for the morning. That's super important to support your adrenals and rehydrate in the morning. Lever number 2 I want to focus on for today is just work out like a busy person. Consider the fact that you're busy. Don't work out like a 20-something-year-old fitness influencer. Don't copy the plan that you saw from your favorite fitness influencer, right? So that's just not the way to go. If you're super busy, if you're having these 50, 60 hour plus working weeks, do 2 strength sessions, 40 minutes max, and do 1 interval training session. Also on that end, we're not diving into details of workouts right now, but on Instagram, plenty free resources around that. So if you, for example, send me a message, you can also comment here below the podcast, comment protocol. I'll send over like a free resource how you can approach your training in that exact way. But the key is strength 2 times, 40 minutes max, intervals 1 time, 20-25 minutes max. All right, so that is a way of working out where it allows you to increase your metabolic rate, making sure you're burning more calories at rest, therefore losing body fat easily. Plus you're making it long term. You have the nice compound interest effect of growing some muscle, toning up, increasing metabolic rate, and building up year after year, month after month, week after week as well, of course. Plus you're not unnecessarily increasing cortisol levels, which happens with, again, coming back to the client example I gave you, which happens when you're doing a lot of CrossFit, for example. It's usually 60-minute sessions, right? Very little rest, very exhausting, and you're not really building up from session to session because you're not tracking everything that you're doing, of course. So it's not about more training, it's about the right signal. That's where the intervals and strength come into play, plus actual recovery, and doing 3 sessions max a week allows you for actual recovery. Of course, in individual scenarios, maybe just 1 or 2 sessions would be the best idea. If you're like super stressed, you have some conditions that prevent you from recovering well, right? You have some fatigue symptoms, right? Your thyroid is like very, you have thyroid issues and so on. But at the same time, Usually these like 3 sessions, you should be doing fine with that, right? It also gives you enough recovery time to rest between those sessions, so that we should be doing fine. And lever number 3, also really crucial, is sleep. You should be protecting your sleep, just like the morning. Protect your sleep like it's your salary. So take care of your sleep. Make sure that at night after 9 p.m. you're not doing things that stimulate you like crazy. So everything that leads to like increases in dopamine and pushes you, stimulates you, like horror movies, thriller movies, series on Netflix, at the same time books that might be stimulating. Don't do it. The last 2 hours of the day should be to wind down and prepare you for sleep, so that you can fall asleep quickly. You fall asleep within 5 minutes, right? You sleep through the night, you're not waking up, but really make sure, go to bed before 11, turn off the lights before 11, darken your room. So you should just protect your sleep. And part of that also is cutting caffeine after 2. That's something super individual. Some people sleep very well with having caffeine late, but statistically, after 2 p.m., a maximum of 2 coffee throughout the day, that should be the limit, so that you can protect your sleep, you can fall asleep quickly, and you can sleep through the night. Right? Also, the dinner shouldn't be the last thing you're doing throughout the day. So if you're sleeping by 11, you shouldn't be eating dinner by 10, rather like 7, right? 6, 7, latest would be 8. Also something very individual. If you're very sensitive and can't sleep for 3 hours after food, then you should have your dinner at 7. And if you're like totally fine with that and you can eat and right away fall asleep, then you can also have your dinner at 8. But something very individual. But that should be the most basic things that you're doing. So if you have cravings, you have trouble falling asleep at night, staying asleep, little energy when you're waking up, and you need caffeine to survive the day, at the same time you're struggling with losing belly fat, you're not progressing in your training sessions, and you have these symptoms of continued like worrying, anxiety, these can all be signs for that chronically increased cortisol levels. So go through the 3 steps that I outlined above to support your body. And if you found this at least a bit valuable, it would mean the world to me if you shared this with a friend who's in a similar situation. And if you just scroll up, rate the podcast, and subscribe to it, regardless of what platform you're in. See you next time.